the mental fitness and whether or not our people are mentally fit to practice what I call intellectual self-defense. And I think as out of shape as young people are in any other way, like we talk about teen obesity, we talk about our diet, how it's killing our kids. We're putting red dye in their system, and that's creating some situations that you don't have in other countries that outlawed that, right? If you look at the steady diet of chemicals that are going into our kids because of so-called food deserts. Food deserts are like man-made lakes. Those aren't deserts. Those are like, that's when you do that on purpose and you move people there. Food deserts in the United States, where food is so abundant that we throw away more than we eat, right? We pay farmers not to produce any more food, and then we pay them just to produce corn so we could create all this poison that we put into our kids' system, and then we wonder why they're jacked up and they're not always physically fit. But the ones who are physically fit, oftentimes it's because it's within our culture. We have a culture of, number one, workers, but we also have a culture of athleticism. We definitely reward athleticism physically. But what about mental athleticism? What do we do there? Because there's that number of Americans that are okay with the way things are going right now, not because they're okay with the real situation, but because they don't know what the real situation is. They don't have the context for understanding what it is. You say authoritarianism, what does that mean? To them, they're kind of like, nothing's going to change in my life. Nothing's going to be different tomorrow. They'll say that all the way up until the day that something is really different. And then it'll be like, well, how come nobody told me about this? What do we say about mental fitness? What do we say about putting more emphasis on intellectual self-defense? And my prescription that we're real far behind on it.
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
Welcome to another episode of Freedom Friday. It is Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with the group and me. So I am a father. I'm a man. I'm a citizen. I'm a voter. I'm a lot of different things, have lots of different identities. But I'm asking myself increasingly, what does it mean to be any of those things in a time when the world's falling apart? Like, what does it mean for a father? You're responsible for children. They're getting messages from the world that I think make them uneasy and give them anxiety. But because they're young people, they don't express that in ways that it's easy for you to see it. So as a parent, you have to be really kind of dialed in, thinking to yourself, these are signs of a little bit of anxiety here, there, whatever. And you got to act appropriately. And at the same time, it's worse than they think. That there's stuff going on right now that in your lifetime, you have not seen it this bad. At least I'll speak for myself. We're talking about war in another country with some serious consequences and some serious situations and escalations over there that are different for me in my lifetime. We've been to war before. We've done things before, whatever, but this is different. And now I got young people still in my household where I have to keep some sense of normality, some sense of day-to-day, just like regular life and living. They want to go be with their friends. They want to hang out. They want to do stuff that kids do. It's their time to be that age. And at the same time, as a parent, I feel this gravity to make sure that they're prepared for whatever the world could be that they may not be seeing right now. So, Ish, I want to talk to you a little bit about this, brother. We usually answer questions like this, like, how do you teach at a time when the world is falling apart? How do you be a parent at a time? So we ask questions like that because we know that we're responsible. We're responsible for some young minds here. We don't want to make them afraid of everything, and we don't want to leave them out there having no clue about what's going on in the world too. So what do you think is the balance between scaring them about everything in the world or whatnot and, letting them just have their time?
That's a real tension, right? And as a, parent, as a father, I wrestle with that heavily. We, ever since the boys were young, we watched Democracy Now! While we're eating dinner. As you can tell, it's been pretty heavy, especially, our oldest always like, oh, I don't know if I want to see dead bodies right now. And for us, especially as they're getting older, it becomes even more important that they're seeing this disaster across the world and understand that it just didn't pop up out of nowhere, that it just didn't just happen, right? There's a long trajectory that produced what we see right now. So for me as a parent, I do go the hardcore route. We watch PBS NewsHour. We make them sit there and watch at least the beginning headlines and discuss with them about what's happening around the world and how it relates, and even ask questions like, is this being discussed at school? How is it being discussed? Like, what are your friends saying? Are they aware of it? Like, and those type of conversations. And most of the time the answer is like no, 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 across the board. And then we do challenge them to be like, what are you going to do about this? Like, what is our responsibility? So we do place that burden, quite frankly, on our 10-year-old, 13-year-old, 16-year-old, and 18-year-old. Um, and it is hard at times. But at the same time, they've been through it so many years now that they even like approach it almost like, oh, well, this is a continuation of this. Oh, I remember this in the past, right? They're able to connect the dots and recognize all the things that are happening now. So like all this talk about like nuclear arms and everything, like the older ones remember us discussing, that was the rationale for the war in Iraq and how nothing was found, right? And making those connections throughout time, even if they weren't alive at the time, the war was still going on around the time that they, started to recognize and understand things, and then it's still discussed in some context, right? So, like those things, I think is so important. Now, as a teacher, I think it's very important that folks focus on critical thinking, the ability to discern between what's real and what's not, right? Because what happened recently in Minnesota, right? How many different stories came out of that story, right? Fake news wise and misinformation wise, to distract from the ultimate story, which is this man assassinated, state senators or tried to assassinate two states. You know what I mean? So, like, all this conversation is important for folks to understand and differentiate between what's real and what's not, especially in this age. For me, that's what I would focus on as an educator. But as a parent, I go hard in the paint, bro. We talk about all those things.
I think when I'm listening to you talk, the thing about watching Democracy Now! During dinner time is a way of implanting constant learning. It's like passive learning in a way, it's on. It's the backdrop. It's the wallpaper in your house, right? So if that's the wallpaper, what you just said to me seems brilliant, because when something comes up, it's not like your young people in your house are without data points or context points that they had already picked up already. So it's not new to them. It's not fresh. It's not like they're being caught like the deer in the headlights, proverbial deer in the headlights, which I love that idea. So keep it going on. I've heard people talk about we listen to NPR in the car every day. That's what I listen to. I do it on purpose. I know it's boring, blah, 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 blah. But after a while, it's not boring to them. It's just normal. It's just the backdrop. And they are picking up little things, even though they don't know they are, over time. I love the idea of preconditioning your young people so that, when the time comes, they already know something about this. But that is going hard. Like, listen to Democracy Now! During dinner time. Yeah, that's like, that's some serious stuff there. I think back when I was in my fourth grade. No, I want to say sixth grade, fifth or sixth grade, is when the United States was having some tension with Iran, with Iran. And I can remember at that age, it getting down to our age group, but still we were trying to, like, that was our parents' stuff. We were trying to just do our thing and go to school and have fun and be involved in the gossip of the day and, the school stuff, whatever. But I do remember every now and then an educator would try and give us like some insight on something that was going on like that in the world. And when they did, it always came with an American point of view, right? Like I look back on it now, I didn't know that then, but they had us like drawing American flags and kind of like, death to Iran type pictures and stuff. Like, you want to talk. This is why, you grow up to be kind of like a militant Black parent. Like, no, don't teach my kids that, because we had experience here or there, and I want to say in some ways I was preconditioned in the way that you're saying, because my dad was militant. My dad was like, your school books are bullshit, blah, 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 whatever. And I can remember just half being with them and half being like, yeah, Dad, I just, feel like, whatever. This is normal. This is what we learn. So you'd have to be watching out for it. What do you think about, though, knowing when it's real serious? Knowing when, like, yes, you and I have been prepared for things to be worse than they had been, but have we been prepared for it to go all the way to hell? Right. And are we going to be some of the first ones? In every time, there's the people that see it first, like when something bad is about to happen. While everybody else is over there partying and doing whatever they do, there's always that group of people that are like, oh man, like, I'll give you a for instance. Everybody uses the same example. Germany, the 40s, early 40s in Germany. There were people that got out early. There were people that left and said, oh, no, 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 no. I see the writing on the wall here. I know what's about to happen here, and got out. That was because they were already on alert that that could happen. Everybody else was like, oh, no, 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 no. Our neighbors would, come to our defense. And, that would never happen. Slowly but surely, their neighbors were the ones dropping dimes on them. So, what do you think about that? Keeping things normal in your household, keeping things normal with your family, but also paying attention to the signs that something really bad could be happening that's worse than you think.
Well, before I answer that, I gotta mention it's interesting you bring up when you're a child with the Iran and the propaganda, because
Yeah.
what came to me was the first Iraq War when I was a child, and I remember second grade like coloring yellow ribbons,
Negro, don't
and
tell me you were in second grade for the Iraq War.
I'm not dating myself, but yes. No, the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, I was out in Washington D.C. I ain't that young now.
I was about to
Um,
say, damn,
nah.
really?
The
Because
first one, the UN backed one. But yeah, you know, I guess normalcy that we try to instill within our children is the sense of that this is an extension of kind of how this society developed. It's a consequence of the decisions, just the emphasis on extraction and exploitation that is founded upon, the genocide that is founded upon, and the mythologies that developed about what the society tells itself about itself, right? And so as we get to this point now, we are trying to emphasize like this is different. Like this is like a step further beyond what it has been in the past, right? There was always this sense of like, there is a moral kind of responsibility of politicians not to be demagogues on the extreme, right? Even though we do have a couple here and there throughout, they have been looked at and shunned in history, like McCarthyism, right? As something that this country engaged in negatively. But when we come to the current situation, I see a bunch of folks who support the current administration, right? I'm talking about every average white folk, even a sprinkling and spattering of black folks, right? Who would support kind of American citizens being shipped out of this country to concentration camps, would support the military coming and shooting people in public or public hangings. Like there's a thin line between that reality and the reality that we're seeing now. And that slippery slope has been undertaken. I mean, the fact that there isn't that much pushback besides Democratic senators getting arrested for trying to answer a question, right? That's also some crazy stuff I've never heard of or seen, ever since I don't think like during Reconstruction or before Reconstruction, leading up to the Civil War, where, Sumter got his head beat in. Like those are the only examples I can think of to the extreme. And that was before the Civil War, right? So when we add that to today, and you see the situation, and again, with all the misinformation, so much information that you don't know what's real and what's not, this society has created the conditions where a large percentage of folks are fine with that level of authoritarianism, is fine with a fascist type of situation, fine with their healthcare benefits getting cut as long as Black people suffer as well. You know what I mean? Like, and this is the mentality that is like a thoroughfare that almost half of this population in this society, voting population wise, believe in and co-sign. So I wouldn't be surprised that slippery slope, like one day it just starts happening, and then people make excuses while other people show up at balls and take pictures and everything and pretend this isn't falling apart right in front of us.
I mean, there were those people in the Titanic who kept playing the violin as it was going down. And there was supposed to be stories that the musicians took it as an honor to go down playing still while everybody else was getting off. there was some attempt, I don't know how this works out, but to keep it normal as the ship was going down, and they were doing their part. And then they got in that cold ass water and they thought to themselves, yeah, I don't know if that was the best idea. I think that may have been a bad idea, right? Um, you said a couple of things in there that make me wonder about the fitness of Americans and the mental fitness, and whether or not our people are mentally fit to practice what I call intellectual self defense. And I think as out of shape as young people are in any other way, like we talk about teen obesity, or we talk about our diet, how it's killing our kids. We're putting red dye in their system, and that's creating some situations that you don't have in other countries that outlawed that, right? If you look at the steady diet of chemicals that are going into our kids because of, so-called food deserts. Food deserts are like man-made lakes. Those aren't deserts. Those are like, that's when you do that on purpose and you move people there, right? Food deserts in the United States, where food is so abundant that we throw away more than we eat, right? Like we pay farmers not to produce any more food, and then we pay them just to produce corn so we could create all this poison that we put into our kids' system, and then we wonder why they're jacked up and they're not always physically fit. But the ones who are physically fit, oftentimes it's because it's within our culture. We have a culture of, number one, workers, but we also have a culture of athleticism, right? So we definitely reward athleticism physically. But what about mental athleticism? What do we do there? Because what you just described, there's that number of Americans that are okay with the way things are going right now, not because they're okay with the real situation, but because they don't know what the real situation is. They don't have the context for understanding what it is. You say authoritarianism. They're like, what does that mean to them? I mean, they're kind of like, what? Nothing's going to change in my life. Nothing's going to be different tomorrow. They'll say that all the way up until the day that something is really different. And then they'll be like, well, how come nobody told me about this? What do we say about mental fitness? What do we say about putting more emphasis on intellectual self-defense? And my prescription that we're real far behind on it.
I think that's the question, right? You look at even literacy rates within this society, right? How low the reading levels are of our youth, but also of adults. And I'm not just talking about a small percentage of people. Most people can't read past the sixth, seventh grade level. And that's not, disparaging them, but, you should be concerned about how ahistorical folks are, and how little it's respected to actually be like that. If anything, even this pushback now that we see from a large percentage of people that support Trump is kind of this anti-intellectualism, that something is elitist when you are able to use big words that folks don't understand. And I would even push back on some folks who are educated using those big words, right? You might as well be speaking another language. It's good to be able to speak to the average everyday person about things and be able to communicate deeper, complex ideas. That's why I think educators find themselves in a very unique space where they should be taking their skills beyond the classroom and into their neighbors' houses, into their family households, right? They need to be able to take those skills that they learned about talking to diverse audiences, about complex ideas at the intersection of social economic realities, right? Very few people in this society have those experiences, and educators are uniquely positioned to be able to do that. But it doesn't mean dumbing it down, but it means being able to explain it in a way that kind of sparks the curiosity in individuals to look into something much more deeper. And I ain't talking about going on YouTube and going down the Illuminati, wormhole or whatever.
Hey,
I'm talking
don't
about
disparage the Illuminati, bro. Listen.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Folks watch a couple YouTube videos and think, they have the answers to the universe. And
but I will say this. Akil Parker, right?
Yes.
I'm only personalizing what you're saying right now, in that there's times where I look at math and all that formula stuff and whatever, and I don't want to see any more of it because I just know I missed something at some point. But then you talk to someone like him, and he's like, "That's just because you don't understand. Let me tell you." And then he talks to you in a way that it's like, there's nothing smart about using words that nobody understands to prove that you are smart. The smartest people can explain astrophysicists type of work to kindergartners. That's when you're smart. You want to be really smart? Explain to me how the hell calculus works, and explain it to me at 2 levels below where I am, not where I am actually. Really be simple about it. That's when you're brilliant. You're brilliant when you can explain complex things in very simple ways. I had somebody once tell me about leadership, and she was one of the best leaders I'd ever seen. Like just sharpest knife I've ever seen in any room. And she said to me, "You know what, Chris? One of the biggest things that good leaders do is they simplify things. They don't make anything more complicated. They make everything simpler, and everybody loves them for that because everything's complicated to a lot of people, right?" And I remember thinking to myself, like, I thought she was going to tell me some stuff that, leadership is about being a strong model and, leading by example and, the pack runs at the same pace as the leader and all that type of stuff, right? No, she's just like, no, it's very simple. Keep it simple, make it simple, simplify things, because you will often be in meetings where people are talking about things that should be simple as if it's like, the most complex thing ever. So for our young people, I would say the same thing around, I only bring up Akil because that's my personal experience with this, in that there's times I look at some math things and I'm thinking, why do we even have to know this? I don't even have to do this. I got a phone, blah, blah, blah. I think like the kids do on this one. But then you meet someone like him and he's like, no, math is beautiful. You're like, wait, what? Where? Where's math beautiful? And you talk to someone like him and you say to yourself, I wish I had had teachers that were able to simplify this stuff for me. Something you just said that I think is really important. You said that teachers teaching outside of school, outside of class, could keep spreading kind of that knowledge and helping simplify things in a tough time like we're in right now. I would add to that, yes, and we put a lot on teachers, but we need to expand the definition of what a teacher is outside of the school and the classroom, right? Because we got teachers all around us that we're not deputizing, that we're not enlisting and putting into play. Like, it's time. Let's get into action. Mama Toya in Philly, she's getting grandmoms to like understand literacy and how to be literacy deputies, right? Like to get out there and deputize arrest young people. Now, I'm saying this in positive ways. Arrest them for illiteracy, right? And then get them literate. So I wonder, what do you think we do? How do you think we popularize that idea that your uncle, your aunt, your whatever, you're a teacher, like you are a teacher, and it's a moment like this that it's time to flip that switch and flip the light on whatever you can teach young people. What do you think?
Well, I think there's tons of folks out there that think they are anyway, and they don't know what the heck they're talking about. There's a bunch of folks like that. I think it's also, along with all, the need to do that, is the sense of responsibility about what does that mean? What are you rooting that in? And I think that like somebody like a Mama Toya, who I knew before she was, more active than how active she is now, she always talks about like how reading Martin Malcolm in America changed the way she looked at the world, and that how she looked at her neighborhood she grew up in, and then what her mother taught her. And like she had to go through that unlearning process in order to start thinking about what things need to be done in the current situation. And so I think that is very important, to be in shared learning opportunities with folks who are educators, with community folks, with parents, you know what I mean, in the same space, talking about the world, but also relating it to reading things, to exploring things, to really hashing out how we're interpreting what is in front of us right now. And I think it becomes even more important the more we're awash with the information just for information's sake, right? No other time in history can we pull up the world and all the information in the world in real time, even if it's from a different language or a different, ideology. No other time in the world, right? But then the question that becomes, what are you doing with that information? How are you going to use it in a way that actually brings up and fortifies our folk, or fortifies our children and protects them from what the situation is, while also giving them the insight necessary in order to dream of something different than what currently exists? So when you brought up Akil Parker, like, that's my man. Like when I see him present about all, I'm like, oh snap, I didn't even think about that before, right? The leader quote that you just said about making it simple, I'm thinking to myself like, maybe that's why I'm slipping a little bit. I need to make it more simple for folks, right? And these are the type of things that folks need to be learning, but you need to be a constant learner and you need to approach life like that. Like you can't be like, well, I know everything because I go to the local bar and this would, no, it's like you need to really interrogate what you think you know about what you think you know. And the more you do that, the more of an educator, the more of a person that you're actually engaging in people on a two-way street. Because any good educator worth their salt knows if you don't know that student in front of you, that student is not learning from you. And vice versa. If that student doesn't know who you are, they are not learning from you. And so, what conditions are we creating where we're actually creating a space for folks to actually engage in ways that are meaningful? Because the wise man that knows something knows that they know nothing at all. But then we still have a responsibility to share what we have learned and then go through the process of learning what other people have gone through in order to interpret what we're seeing today.
Seems like to do that, to do what you're saying, you need the space and the time. And so where do you do that? Like, I love the ideas that people go to the point of sale, like they go to barbershops on some things, right? And drop off a bunch of books. So you have to ask yourself, what are all the point of sales? Like, where are all the places where we could come together and distribute a message? Now, I want to ask you something that's a little bit more nihilistic, which is, what if we already lost because our kids are they're feeding on a fire hose of misinformation, of garbage. They're like garbage information is coming to them in bigger chunks than we've ever seen before because they're wired. They're like wired in now, right? And I wonder if we lost already because we don't have anything that competes with social media and the super highway of garbage information. We don't have anything that competes with that. So we are fighting an uphill battle. If we are trying to raise culturally literate, knowledgeable people who are free about their understanding of the world and who have the historic context to be free, if that's our goal, we're in real trouble because they are mainlining garbage information right into their veins. And the only thing that I could see that could turn that around is not going to happen. The thing that I see could turn around is if we create a concept of offlining your kids, getting your kids offline, and whatever you have to do, tricking them into being offline, demanding that they be offline, structuring their time and whatever so that they spend more time offline. It's kind of like getting somebody off of a substance, illicit substance, right? But if we don't offline large numbers of kids, I think we're just fighting an uphill battle. We probably already lost. Now, that's my nihilistic thought. I throw that at you and tell me if you're more positive than I am.
Uh, I wish I could. I guess the only thing that you know goes against that not that feeling, right, and quite frankly, somewhat of that reality is that when I meet folks who are actually doing the work, when I talk to a Mama Toya, right, when I collaborate with an Nikhil Parker or with other folks really trying to get out there and do the work, right, when I see that spark go off in the teacher's head that they never even thought of before because they weren't exposed to a certain idea. And the same thing for any type of situation, right? That gives me hope. Now, at the same time, another thing that gives me hope is, this John, is teetering on the edge, and folks will be brought offline whether they like it or not, in my opinion, in the long run. And you can call that nihilistic. I just think it's just a function and the fluctuations of how civilization and the world works, right? And I think it's very important to recognize that it's our responsibility to prepare folks for that situation, for that reality, and as many folks that are willing to listen as possible. Now, when it does come to the situation, I do get worried, right? I take public transportation almost every day, bro, in Philadelphia. And like, if you want to see kind of like that intersection of all the stuff, all the, overabundance and then lack of substance and then all, combined at the same time. And I don't give a F mentality about everything besides myself. You start to realize like this is George Washington, brought down to the core. This is what these people who created this society really stood for, right? Only for self. And they wanted to build up for self and have more and more. And then it would trickle down to us peasants, right? And this is the mentality that a lot of, unfortunately, our youth are being inundated with and indoctrinated with day in and day out. And then you mix that with like an indoctrination of like America first, or, well, they never, and we see this, right? Oh, well, they never fought for us, so why do we care about them? And you start to see this bubble up more and more. And it's like, well, what's right though?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so I do get concerned. And Martin King warned us, and I keep on bringing this up. He's like, if we don't change direction, we're going to be drugged down the long dark corridor of desperation and despair. And that was right before they shot him. And so we do see ourselves at the situation now where it is bad. But I think as that is more negative, there will be elements within not just this society, but the world that will represent the positive that balances that out, whether the situation goes south real quick or it's a slow burn.
You mentioned Dr. King and they shot him. I think for that generation that watched that, that was traumatic for them because he was their source of hope that we were going a right direction. And look what happens at the end there, right? And towards the end, he was starting to give hint to the idea that, he may not make it all the way to where he had planned to get. And it started to sound a little bit more dark. Maybe I'm integrating my people into a burning house, right? The stuff about the war and militarism and racism started taking on a different tone towards the end of his life, right? And some of us might say that he was prophetic about the idea that he knew what was coming, but the people who watched that and who lived after him had that now in their mind as the grand example. You go too far with this trying to be free, and this is what happens, right? So for my dad's generation, he would have been the generation that watched that. And then I came after that, right? I came in the Gen X generation, which born the year he died, right? So I don't have any recollection of what that was. And then we go into this age, like, the 70s and late 70s, where there's all this malaise and negative talk. This is Gen X child talking, and, malaise and all this type of stuff. And when the 80s hit, it's this artificial explosion of like candy, like materialism run amok. So my dad went from hopeful death of hope. And I was born into death of hope that gets better and better and better because we have Mercedes now. We have Porsches now. We have, look at the 80s media stuff that we grew up on in the 80s in terms of media. And it is all materialism. Materialism is good. Greed is good, whatever. So in our life, we went from that negative to a more positive uplift, only to be on a cliff of, really, is this all there is? Like you get into the 90s and then into the 2000s, you're like, damn, really? This is the apex? And then we have kids, right? Like, and they're born into our aftermath of, I don't know what this shit is. I don't like my dad had the death of hope. I had the rebirth of hope and now the plateau. And now I'm watching the decline of even the plateau. We're going faster down a slope. That's the Gen X parenting. And we're raising millennials who are raising, out Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I guess I say all that just to say it feels like there is no winning. It feels like there's, in all those examples I gave from different generations, and I think maybe young people are figuring out faster that there's no winning. And because they're figuring out faster, oh, this isn't a beatable situation. They're number one, either dropping out mentally and physically, or they are joining the team. Like some of them are just succumbing, like, screw it. I'm going to be a materialist as much as possible. Everything I just said is it's a big loss. If you go back before my dad's generation, like go all the way back to Harriet Tubman or something like that, and get their opinion on where we at right now, they probably would say we're in the best possible position we've ever been in. And I would have to argue with them about that. I'm saying right here this morning, Harriet Tubman, I would have to argue with you if we had to talk about now. What do you think about that, Ish? I feel like that's commentary. That's a lot of commentary. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, every generation thinks the previous generation's headed to hell in the handbasket, right? I remember
Yes, the
hearing that
next
when I was a
generation. They
child.
all
The
think the
next
next. Yeah, yeah,
generation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I remember hearing that as a child. I remember my father saying, rap was just a fad. I was like, it's a fad. Yeah, it's
I
craziness.
remember that. My dad said the same thing.
And I pull his card every single time around that now when he likes certain hip hop songs that I'm playing, right?
You know what
but
they used to say? They used to say, it's just talking over music. It's just a fan. I'm sorry. Go ahead, man.
no, and that's directly connected. And again, and this somewhat gets spiritual for me about like how deep it is, right? We're you know doing it more than simply for the loot, right? For the money. If we have to have folks dedicated to this type of work of educating, but also being real about the situation as we move forward. And I think, Chris, you do this on the platform. The way and the subjects and the ideas that come out, you know what I mean, are so powerful. Like you get the responses for people. And as long as we're doing that, even if it's like one or two people that listen, that switch up the game for themselves and then teach their children differently, that's much more than anybody ever could claim. And that's the way we need to start approaching how we're doing it. The hope lies in what lies in our ability to hope that the future will be different, that our children will dream of something necessary. And though it seems dark, right? People didn't think enslavement was going to be over in the middle of it. It didn't stop people hoping it wouldn't. It didn't stop people from running away. It didn't stop people from breaking the law, helping people run away, right? And the same thing during Jim Crow. Jim Crow, that was just live life. That, for a lot of folks, people didn't think it would just end abruptly, but it didn't stop teachers from teaching children of thinking of a different future that should exist. So yes, we find ourselves now in a position where we're more materially sound in regard, but that is also a little bit on us quicksand. It's not guaranteed on the long term, and we know that in our guts. Our folks know that in our guts. But then what are we doing in order to create the conditions for folks to approach things differently? And I think that's what we're also seeing, because at the first time in history, we can get on these microphones and then screen ourselves halfway across the world speaking what we want to speak on. And ain't nobody coming to our house yet to kidnap us and put a black bag over our heads. We might be on some government list somewhere, but they ain't coming to our house and putting a black bag over our heads yet, which makes it even more
I think
urgent.
there's some people waking up in El Salvadorian prisons right now. So kind of, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah.
Just simply based on what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But that's why we have to make it stark, man. We can't half-ass the work that needs to be done and be like, get worried and scared about our material situation when it gets a little too, truth shaking for the powers that be. And that hopefully that won't be coming as soon as it will. But the way things are going with even the monitoring of our information, putting giant AI machines so they can filter and determine who is a threat and who's not a threat. Like, these are realities that are coming down, and that we have to really be able to not be afraid of what that's going to be like, because what's necessary is us not being afraid and standing firm when it needs to be able to stand firm.
It makes me think of cell phone towers. Like, what you're saying is each person is transmitting a certain amount of range, but they're not going to transmit the whole field. That's why you have cell phone towers. You have different ones that bounce signals off of each other that gets it into everybody's phone. So are you listening to this, a person listening to this, are you a cell phone tower? Right? Because I'm going to get a little poetic here, but back in the day, we talked about hip hop. Back in the day, it was like two turntables and a microphone. Now, ask yourself, What came out of two turntables and a microphone, right? Imagine going back to the first time that there were two turntables and a microphone and telling that person you are about to change the course of culture and history worldwide, not just locally. That brother was just like, no, I got two turntables and a microphone, and I want people to have a good time tonight, right? Think about now, instead of two turntables and a microphone, I got a microphone, an iPhone, and a MacBook, and I can reach millions of people. Last year, my organization reached probably 4 million people, right? That's I'm just a one dude with a very small platform and small following. As a matter of fact, like, this is people that didn't follow me. So I'm a cell phone tower, whether I like it or not, with these little simple tools. It's these simple tools that are available to everybody. They weren't available to me when I was younger. If they had been, I would have been dangerous, right? But you mentioned democracy now. I could run my own little democracy now, and these are things that that the feds can't get you for, because they can control major media. They can't control what comes out of your cell phone tower because you own your cell phone tower, right? So, to the extent that you want to teach and educate others, I feel like my best leg forward is to just amplify educators, amplify them. All I am is your conduit. Like, I know all these dope people that teach dope things. And I know for a fact that if I can amplify that to more people, I'm doing my part. That's all my part is. Like, really. Like, I don't even have to come up with the strong ideas. I just have to know dope people. Right.
No, but I think that speaks to what needs to be done, man. And, I'm super appreciative. I used to watch Eight Black Hands before I was invited to participate that one time. You know what I mean? And the work that needs to be done is being put out there, and it's challenging folks to even just think about it. I think about the Instagram presence, right? Tell me why that Sinners post that y'all put up like months ago is still I'm still getting dings on folks commenting on it or liking it months later, right?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes what we put out in the world, and people are going to refer back to it and think about it. Even if it doesn't hit or slap right away, it will, because what we're doing right here is speaking the truth, man. Mm-hmm. And very few people can claim that. That type of reality. So, I'm so thankful for you. I'm thankful for, the homie Reef who couldn't make it with us today. This is the work that, we need to be doing and talking about constantly.
I'm thankful that I know people like y'all where I can ask a question and I have the answer. Some of the best social capital that we don't talk about for young people is just having people who are accessible, who know something when you need to know it, right? Like, so I could ask a person, like, I got this going on with my kid in school. What do you think? Well, I have a lifeline that a lot of people don't have. But part of my media ministry here, part of my media ministry is to convince every single one of you all that I amplify and come into contact with was every single one of you has a story within you, and the world needs to hear it. The world needs to hear from you. And it's because, in my mind, that's why I call this a media ministry, is I believe that God put individual puzzle pieces in each of us. And if we die with it inside of us without having shared it, we did a disservice to the overall picture, right? So every time we unlock and platform a person who has one of their pieces and they start sharing from their viewpoint, it adds to this major kind of mosaic of truth and reality that will save us, right? So it's actually selfish to not tell your story and platform your story out there. It's actually selfish. It's actually opposed to world peace that you do that. And it's the first step is just me convincing you. That's the first step. The first step, if you are watching this and listening to this right now, my very first step to you is convincing you that you have a story and the world needs to hear from you, because it's essential. There's a part of what you have that you were born to do. There was a part of what you were born to see and say that is necessary for the collective. It's necessary for the rest of the collective. So that's what all this platforming is, right? Now, young people, this is the thing I would say to old people about young people is, I just mentioned 3 tools that could get you to millions of people if you wanted to tell your story. How are we giving our young people access? I visited, give you an example. I visited a school. You might have this in Philly because, bigger cities always have this, but there's a school in Minneapolis that has an actual radio station in it, right? So those young people are running a radio station while they're in high school still. See, we talk about democracy now. Talk about owning the means of production, owning the means of information production at high school level, right? There's a high school in St. Paul, Minnesota, called the High School for Recording Arts. People come from there all around the world to visit it. That school was started because its founder, who used to be like a Prince guy, one of Prince's musicians or something, he saw too many kids that were 2 and 3 years out of school, meaning no one was looking for them. So he went and grabbed a whole bunch of 19-year-olds who still had dangling credits and hadn't finished school, who didn't want to come back to school. And he kind of asked them what would keep them, in school or bring them back. He ended up with a full studio, a full music program that teaches you end to end all of the business of producing music, meaning how you produce the CDs themselves, how you produce the liner notes, how you do the business contracts, all that type of stuff. And guess what? Now you got people who've been 2, 3 years out of school coming to school every day, right? That was his ministry and his mission. But in a long-winded way, all I'm really saying is it's easier than ever to put the means of production when it comes to information into the hands of young people. So maybe I should start doing some youth internships around this, because I'm trying to tell everybody this is easy. This is easy as it's ever been. Bro, listen, when I was young, I was all into music. Music was my thing. You'd have to go spend $400 or $500 on a guitar. And then a Marshall amp would have cost you $200 or $300, right? And then when you got home, if you wanted to record, like a Tascam recorder was about $800. This is back in the day, right? I could get you to the point back in the day where it was like $3,000, $4,000 for you to be able to record at home and make your own stuff, everything and whatever. A couple of $1,000, few $1,000 back in that time, which today would probably be in the neighborhood of, I want to say, maybe $10,000. Talk about the barrier of entry. Today, I could get you a laptop and you're off to the races. If you have a laptop and an iPhone, you are really off to the races, right? Now, people are going to say to me, well, iPhones are $1,000 or more now. Not if you know how to get them. I'm just going to say that. Not everybody gets them the same way. I'm just, some of us, first of all, some of us don't need it to be new all the time. Some of us are down with them. Listen, there's something else I wanted to ask you about, because we talked about it a little bit online, not really a lot. I put up this post around the laundromat. I'm doing a lot of photography right now. I'm going out and taking pictures that are personally meaningful to me in some kind of way because they make me think of something. One of the pictures I took was of a laundromat because I actually sat there and watched the laundromat for a minute. I sat out at the night kind of taking a picture of it, just thinking through my days of having to go to the laundromat in Minnesota in the wintertime without a car that worked, right? Which meant, and on my own, my dammy, that meant I had to get me and my son's clothes to a laundromat. But I had to have quarters, I had to have dollars, I had to have detergent, all that type of stuff, whatever. All this took more planning than it takes me now, right? Back then. And you were like, what do you mean, remember back when? I still do that now, right? I feel like knowing what that experience is helps you not forget the barriers and circumstances that other people have in front of them, right? That's a reason for my post. And hearing you say, well, I still do that now, made me think about, like, are we missing some perspective to even interact with and teach young people if we are missing a million of those little examples of, what it means to not have the middle class kind of set of tools and everything that you need in life. I've heard people say, and it's true, it's more expensive to be poor, right? Costs you more money to be poor. Isn't that ironic? I got people offering me stuff for free. Nobody offered me stuff for free when I when I needed it.
Not even a ride, right?
Yeah. What do you think about this idea, like the laundromat idea of maybe one of the barriers to teaching young people is that we are not experienced or we have forgotten what it's like to have the experiences that they have?
I mean, for me, I hold that actually very philosophically close to me. We purposely live in a neighborhood, a working class neighborhood, that we thought we wanted, not that we thought, that we want to be close to the students that I taught, the families that my wife serves, right? We also have one working vehicle, right? So I take public transportation everywhere. That also reminds me of the reality on the ground. Um, and granted, it's easier to drive, right? It would be much simpler to have all the amenities near you, not just the poppy store down the block, right? But like you do, it's easy to get lost in that comfort, and we're acutely aware of that because number one, we had too many children too young, um, but also as we're getting older and we're stabilizing financially with ourselves, we're starting to realize we don't want to be so away from this reality that we forget what this reality is all about, because there's something about waiting in line for hours at a WIC office, right? In order for your child to be fed, right? That's something we had to go through, and that we have not only, I want to say, even sympathy or empathy. It's like I understand that that's a hot mess. When I see coworkers who work in the school, work uh, in schools, who are paraprofessionals getting paid $17, $18 an hour. I ran into this woman the other day at the bus stop, and she's like, "Hey, I remember you." Da, da. And we started talking, and she's like, "Yeah, I don't work for them anymore. I work for this company, doing stuff for the military and the CARES stuff." She's like, "It pays $18 an hour." She's like, "But I can't feed myself with what I retired with." And it just reminds me how hard it is. Like this woman, 60 something, close to 70 years old, still having to take public transportation, still unable to take, financially care of herself beyond what the means that she has. And that's a reality that a lot of people go through. And it's like, it's so easy to forget that, forget how hard folks work day in and day out. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't imagine like going through that forever. But then at the same time, we have to understand. So when you posted that, I was like, shoot, I don't even got to washer or dryer. I haven't had one in my adult life. I remember when I was a child going to the laundromat with my dad and hating it. I hated waiting at the laundry. But now it becomes a situation I put my own children through and everything. And it becomes a cycle. And even to the point where if I was like, why don't you just get a washer and dryer? I'd be like, yeah, that's all well and good, but these other things need to happen and we can live without it. We could do without it, but it still doesn't it still allows me not to forget, on the ground what folks is experiencing and the reality of it all.
I think psychologically, as a survivor, economic survivor, you try and forget those things on purpose, right? Um, if you've ever lived a lifestyle where everything you own is broke, can't tell you how many mornings with my oldest when he was young, how like you put the key in the car and you go to turn it, and you realize every day that that's a suggestion. That's not a truth, right? Because when you
Yeah.
turn that key, any number of things might happen. It might click, 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 click. Anybody ever had that experience? If you're talking to a person who never had the experience of putting the key in the car in the morning and it going click, 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 instead of turning on the car, instead of starting up the engine, that's a sinking feeling. Knowing that it is 7:15 and you are supposed to be at work at 8:15 and you have to get your kid to either daycare or school before you get to work, and you hear that click, 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 and you got to figure out really quickly what you're going to do. Something people don't. A lot of people I would say, in my class of folks now, probably don't know what it means to miss a couple of hours. What that means to your paycheck on that next Friday, for instance. Like if I am late, I'm supposed to be there at 8:15, and I don't get there until 9:30. Cool if they let me get away with it, but even still, there's a few dollars off of my next check that I can't afford. I wonder if people remember getting cable cut off. I'll give you a better one in Minnesota. Every year in Minnesota, there's what's called the cold weather rule, meaning after I think it's like October 15th, they can't cut your stuff off anymore all the way until the spring. So, if I could just make it to the 15th of
Yep.
October. And one year I missed it. One year
Oh.
I figured it out on like the 16th of like, oh, damn. Now they can cut me off, right? And sure enough, we did get cut off in the middle of winter. And I can remember just the feeling as a dad looking down at my kid who was now wearing a jacket inside, wearing like a winter jacket inside the house, trying to figure out what we were going to do. It's memories like that number one, you try and move away from. Because every year after that, I can remember you just said the thing about the wash and dry. I can remember my first apartment where things worked. Like when you flipped a switch and the air conditioning came on and reliably. It took me a while for it to just feel like, oh, this is going to work every time I flip the switch. But man, I moved into this one apartment that had a washer and dryer in the unit, in the apartment. Bruh, you couldn't have told me nothing after that. Like, you could have told me nothing. But I do remember, I know what it was like to not always have the clean clothes that you need when you need them, or the thing you want to wear when you want to wear it. And now I'm raising other kids now at this age who have nothing, they know nothing about that life, right? Partially because as you kind of middle class yourself, you start doing that on purpose to take that out of the thing. And then people start asking you, should we toughen them up a little bit? Like maybe you maybe you shouldn't take all that out of the way. And part of it is I'm just, I'm trying to die knowing I put my kids as far ahead as I possibly could before I die. That's my only job. So, anyways, I know we're coming towards the end here. What do you say about that, brother? What do you say about the fact that uh, we're talking a lot about teaching kids and what we need to teach them, but I'm focusing, so much more, especially after my college work. I've been studying how adults learn because we could do a lot for kids if we can retrain adults. So what about this idea of retraining us, not kids, about these things of like understanding these experiences that are so important?
Yeah. I mean, just this conversation with itself, I think is going to, hit somebody, right? It's important not to forget these things and place it in a proper context. And with that also produces patience with you. It produces a sense of understanding. Like, I know people go through things. I know that it's difficult, right? And then modeling that not only for other adults, right, and children, but also speaking on that and not being afraid or ashamed of that reality. You know what I mean? Like, I think of my father, he did the same thing. He moved us out to the suburbs, trying to provide a better circumstance for us because he grew up, in the Badlands in Philadelphia. And that man never took us out to eat. The fanciest restaurant when I was a child was Red Lobster in Olive Garden. And I think I went there like 4 or 5 times my whole child life.
I just want to say there's nothing wrong with Olive Garden.
No. But like, that was you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so like now
it is pretty fancy,
it is. And we take our kid, our kids have experienced much more and we want to give them a leg up, right? But there's certain things that, I learned from being in that circumstance, right? And sharing our stories, and just this is full circle, y'all. Sharing our stories allows us to actually understand where other people are coming from. And when we understand more where other people coming from, and we're actually open and honest about where we came from, we get to a deeper realization about who we actually are. And I think that's really what it is. So you sharing that story with me, man, I would have never guessed in a million years that you struggled like that, right? But then it makes me flash back to myself and how much we struggled. I remember our first apartment above a store on 5th and Lehigh, and I had to walk a mile to work every day in order, to feed my family at that time, making $28,000 a year. And I already had, a child and my wife. So thinking of that reality and then having those moments where we had electricity cut off, right? Where we had to go to the Y as a family and take showers, That's a reality that folks need to know about, and be able to understand that, like, even whatever situation you think people are in doesn't mean you actually know what they've been through, and that should be able to make you more humble, but at the same time much more urgent to speak and defend human rights, human dignity, and do what's right in the world, man. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me, and my journey within itself. I'm going to be much more purposeful, to make things simple. I love that, Leader John. That's going to
I
switch up the whole
mean,
game for me.
like
Uh,
as much as you can simplify everything. This last piece, though, on the laundromat, it was interesting to me the number of people that responded to me and said, "Oh yeah, I know all about that life. I know about all those days." And these are six-figure people. People who are making six figures, and good six figures, who are like, "I will never not know what that was like because I did it already." The thing that I think is different about them is that there's a level of rigor to their stamina, because they, in their back of their mind, they know that they could do that if they had to. It wouldn't be weird. Like, I could go back into a laundromat today with all my clothes, and it wouldn't be like me trying to figure stuff out, right? We've talked about this before. I spent time living in a car for an entire summer, living in a Ford Fiesta at that. I lived in a Camry once and a Ford Fiesta once. No, it wasn't a Camry. It was a Supra, Toyota Supra once, and a Camry once. I don't say that for any other reason, to say once you have done that, you know what you're capable of doing. Now, it's interesting for people to say to me now, like, I would have never known that you could have, lived a life like that. And I'm like, yeah, that was the whole thing. That was the goal. The goal was to get to a place in life where people wouldn't even think that that's where I came from. But I'm happy to know that it is. I'm happy to know. Man, I pulled a rabbit out of a hat so many times. Like, when it came to getting a meal on the table for the oldest kid, when it came down to getting programs and getting things paid and getting stuff done, I was a ninja. I was a ninja at that. I could listen. If I had to go back, let me tell you one. Have you ever done the trick where you send the check and all the bills to the wrong ones? So you send the electric bill to the water people and the water bill to the cable and the cable blah blah, and they call you and they say, "Oh, I think there must have been some mistake. You sent your electric bill instead to us." And you're like, "Oh yeah, wow, damn, I'm sorry. Let me get that. Let me get that right back out to you on payday." Um, I'm not saying this because these are good things. I'm only saying it's because you have to learn these type of gymnastics. And if you forgot about that today and you're teaching kids, if you're teaching young people who, someone pointed out to me about the laundromat thing, this is why in her educational life, she makes sure that her schools and her kids have access to clean clothes as part of being an educator. She makes sure that that happens as part of her running her school. Man, that's deep. You wouldn't think to do that if you didn't know something about it, right? All right, brother. Well, listen, this has been a great discussion, for everybody listening and watching. We appreciate you. Please share this with others as you think that they would enjoy it. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you're still not free, but hopefully you are freer after this hour with Ish and me. We'll see you guys next time.